Would you impress upon the listener how pivotal the role was for the United States to be in Iceland? You go there, what is a major in October of 1941 before Pearl Harbor?
You know, I went over there as a first lieutenant, but I rose real fast, very rapidly. I was almost immediately after we were there, I was made the aide-de-camp to the commanding general and promoted to captain right away. We arrived there in September, but the planning of it had gone forward for several months. Iceland was a pivotal factor in the international scene back in early 41. The British had occupied Iceland with the troops that I think had got out of Dunkirk, but it was a limited number of personnel that they had. And there was a intercept of codes which the British got from Germany that the Germans were going to invade Iceland. I don't know all the political details that went on from there, but I do know that in late spring, my general got called to Washington and was told to form a contingent of a task force of not less than 15,000 men to go to Iceland to supplement and to assist the British if necessary, although we were not in war. We couldn't get together 15,000 men because they'd had selective service law, which was enacted at the time and allowed most of the men to service 1 year, and they would be out in October. Therefore, it was decided that we better send up, in a hurry, we better send up a regiment of Marines. So the Marines got up there in July ahead of us. But in the meantime, we are forming our group of all regular Army soldiers and officers. And we went up there in September and relieved the Marines shortly thereafter, and they went back home. It was a sort of an arduous task because Iceland was, they only had 125,000 people in the whole country. And of course, we needed communications on all of the islands at various posts around north, south, east, and west. So we established telephones and all sorts of things and modernized the roads and made Iceland into a modern little community, so to speak. We had diplomatic problems, of course, because the poor little Iceland was overwhelmed by all these American troops being up there, but we got along rather well. It was a problem because the Marines, previous to us, had gotten themselves involved with some Icelandic ladies, and trouble started very, very rapidly. I remember having lunch one day in Glasgow, Scotland, with Douglas Fairbanks and one of his other cohorts, famous movie stars, and they both agreed that Iceland had the prettiest girls in the world. So that was quite a compliment for Iceland, I must say.
No wonder the Marines had such a tough time.
That's exactly right. The Marines had a very tough time. It was kind of a tenuous thing because at that time Iceland was the focal point of a great deal of news because here we were not in war and we were going up into a combat zone of the war in Europe. And accordingly, all of the newspapers, including the New York Times and the AP, UP, and INS and so forth, had their reporters up there. So we had quite a large contingent of news people. And suddenly we got a call one day that we hadn't been up there only about 2 months, I guess. And I got a call at an emergency from the Navy that the German submarines had torpedoed the USS Kearney, which is a destroyer, American destroyer. And the general called me in and said that we better get out there and take a look at it. But it was a bit of a problem. How are we going to get out there and look at it, you know, with the submarines around there? So what we did, we went down and got the chief of police, and he gave us a Icelandic fishing trawler so that the Germans wouldn't shoot at an Icelandic fishing trawler, you know. And I went out there, and the Kearney was indeed, it was badly damaged with several casualties, Americans killed on board the destroyer. I came back to the base at Iceland, and the problem was, how do we keep this from the newspapermen? Because this means it's an act of war, and we're not in war. So we tried to keep it as much as we could within ourselves and get all the information back to Washington and let them make the decisions of how they wanted to handle it. And it was successful that we did that. The newspaper people, of course, were unhappy at the fact that we didn't give them the news, but it was a very tenuous time, because it could have been something that we could have made big stories out of it and maybe aroused the American people that here the Germans are sinking our warships, you know. Then it wasn't too long after that we shot down a Focke-Wulf German airplane, a four-engine plane, over Iceland, and it was up in the mountains and near the glaciers. And I had the assignment of take a contingent of men up there to see what, if anything, was recoverable or were the living soldiers of the Germans and so forth. And it took us a couple of days to get up to it, maybe longer than that. It was very difficult traveling in that type of terrain. But I got up there, and of course the Germans were all killed, and I had the remains of everything searched as far as we could, and I found one very important code book, which was extremely important. I didn't realize its importance at the time, although I knew it was a code book, and I took it myself, and after a few days got back down to the base headquarters again, and then we saw that we really had something, because all of the codes of the Germans for the airplanes to the submarines and all sorts of things, here was the German code all handed to us, you know. And when we telegraphed our headquarters over in London, and they got excited, sent a B-24 up and sent me down with the code book, and I turned it over to them, and they in turn, of course, got it to Bletchley Park and other places, and it turned out to be a real boon to the people who were decoding of the Germans, because it told everything it was. And I was pretty tired about this time, I remember, and people say, well, how'd you like the British? That was my first experience with the British. And how I remember was I was so tired and exhausted, they put me up in a little private home, and I went to bed, and I guess I slept a long time, and I got up in the morning to go down and get my breakfast. And a very charming lady was sitting across from me, and I sat and waited and waited and waited. Nobody waited on me. There were no waiters. And I said, do they not have breakfast here? She said, oh, are you waiting for a breakfast? I said, yes. Oh, she said, I'm sorry, I fed it to my dog. You know. And so my first acquaintance with the British was not particularly happy one.